Next thing, 25 guys doing this side, then 35 guys doing this side. Next thing you know, you have two armies screaming and shouting at each other in what? In learning. You see? And the Yeshiva loves it. You follow? And really, they're screaming and carrying on all this kind of stuff over a Tosfos in Baba Kama. Even in the middle of Chazeres HaShatz, even in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah, even in all the places you're not supposed to talk, they're carrying on and screaming like this. And they were unsure, the difficult task facing Reb Elchonon and the others was, what do you do with it? You don't want to turn it off. You understand? You don't want to kill it. On the other hand, you don't want to have it violate the Shulchan Aruch either. And say, how do you exactly ride that horse? But you don't want to break the horse, do you? You don't want to break the horse. So it was a very fascinating period. So I knew this in general, and I see Reb Elchonon was a student there, and fine. He was a teenager, and the time I'm talking about he was in the teens. And I just remember in the back of my head that when I read it long ago, I highlighted it. There's an interesting story over here in terms of reading the New York Times and similar kinds of things. So listen to this. I remind you, this is in the art school biography, which is taken from, I think, the Reb Elchonon, which was by Rabbi Sarasky. Notice what I'm reading to you is from the ultra from, Rabbi Sarasky. This is the Haredi biography. Okay, and he has over here in the footnotes the testimony. What does he say over here? Elchonon never wasted a moment of his day. He was remarkably punctilious in observing the schedules of the yeshiva, and so on and so forth. He could memorize a book from beginning to end, so on and so forth. Then he says over here, a former Telshe yeshiva student, Dr. Binyamin Menashe Levin, spoke from personal experience. Binyamin Menashe Levin learned in Tels. Some people who are scholarly here may have heard of him as the Otzer HaGaonim. Later on, he put out this very famous set with tremendous scholarship. You have to be a big Talmid Chacham and a PhD in order to be able to assemble together what they call the Otzer HaGaonim in many volumes. Anyhow, he says, Reb Elchonon learned German, Reb Elchonon Wasserman in the Telshe Yeshiva, learned German by memorizing the dictionary and mastering the language sufficiently to read all the newspapers and the various scientific works fluently, as was known to the students of later years. In fact, then and in Baranovich, he kept a copy of Kant's Critique of Pure Reason always under his bookshelves and would read it in places where Torah study is forbidden. Remember that, Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. It's not Dr. Seuss. Bear with me. Is related in the Eskara that Reb Elchonon joined some fellow students who were studying German in a house. This entails. Such study was forbidden or frowned on by the yeshiva administration because they distracted students from total immersion in their Torah studies. Consequently, Reb Elchonon's companions studied German secretly. Reb Elchonon read the German grammar book aloud, as he would the Gemara, seemingly oblivious to the need of hiding what he was doing in Telshe. Such behavior led the yeshiva administration to become aware of these activities and put a stop to them. His friends were angry at him. He, however, claimed that he didn't understand why they were resentful. If it's wrong to study German, then why do you do it? If it's not wrong, what's there to hide? Okay. Rabbi Yerucham Varhaftig, who's one of the Shalom Yerucham, he wrote a lot of memoirs of Telshe and the other yeshivas, very fascinating memoirs of the yeshiva world in exactly this time, recounted the following incident from personal experience. A member of the yeshiva staff noticed the Ruskaya Slova, Russian newspaper, like you say the New York Times or something like that, protruding from Elchonon's pocket. Okay. Without hesitating for a minute, the other person, meaning the yeshiva administrator, the mashgiach, the assistant mashgiach, whoever, snatched the newspaper and rushed to the Rosh Yeshiva demanding Reb Elchonon be punished. I believe that too. Reb Elchonon, for his part, demanded that the paper be returned to him to comply. But hey, you have no right to take somebody else's paper. He was asked, we're considering, in other words, the mashgiach or whoever was says, we're considering levying a heavy kanas on you. A fine. In yeshiva, you violate the rules, you have to pay money. And you concern yourself with the few pennies that the newspaper costs? Reb Elchonon insisted, however, that the fine and taking the newspaper without permission were two separate matters. Here we have early foreshadowings of the Palgina Dibura. Okay? Tzvei dinim. First, the newspaper had to retort to its owner, and then we'll see. Former Telshe students added that the Rosh Yeshiva finally consented to allow Reb Elchonon to read the newspaper. I mean, we talk about it. We're not talking about somebody that would... From then onwards, he would enter the yeshiva a few minutes early before going to the official study period and would utilize the time to spread the newspaper over his stender and rapidly read through whatever interested him. I would like to get a photograph of Elchonon Wasserman in the Telshe Beis Medrash reading the New York Times You understand? So I guess. So in other words, I thought that's very interesting. It's what you catch there. Now, how does all this jump at me? As I say, not too long ago, I was at a seminar, I guess a lecture, where a guy was talking about a certain sefer that was published 200 years ago, rather obscure. I'll share with you in a minute. And had to do with Kant, touched on the subject of Kant. Immanuel Kant is perhaps one of the 2 or 3 most famous philosophers, period. And certainly was the god of philosophy in the 18th and 19th centuries afterwards, who had a tremendous impact on Jews and Jewish thinking long after his death. Now today, everything I'm talking about is batel because of Hitler and the Holocaust. After what happened with the Germans, we say the heck with anything German, because what did it all do? You understand? What did it produce? But don't do that. Go back 100 years. Go back 50 years. You understand what I'm saying? It was a different world. And once upon a time, the figure of Kant, as I'll try to explain in a little way that I know how, dominated the world of thought and philosophy. And he wrote like 10, 15 books, all of which are very hard to read. And his 2 most famous works, one is a critique of pure reason, the other one's critique of practical reason. He wrote other books. Those are the 2 big ones. And pure reason is just what it sounds like, pure logical reasoning. And the other one is practical reasoning, what we call ethics and things like that. How do you put it into practice? What does reason tell you to put into practice? That second book is what started Reform Judaism, which started in many respects conservative Judaism, a lot of modern orthodoxy in there. Saint Raphael Hirsch's influenced by Kant. If you read the 19 letters of Ben Uziel, he's one of the 2 protagonists, and he wrote the book. There's Benjamin, there's Naphtali. Benjamin is the young teenage Jew who's having issues with his Yiddishkeit, and Naphtali is the older person trying to keep him in there. And he says to Naphtali, he says, I don't understand, a person like you who even knows Leibniz and Kant, how can you still believe in this Judaism stuff? You see? As I'll try to explain. And Isaac Breuer, who's one year later, was an unbelievable fan of Kant. He said, every time I read him, I make a bracha, right? And I just saw yesterday, he wrote many novels, and the first novel he writes in 1920 is about a bunch of Orthodox Jewish students in Johns Hopkins University, whatever it was in Germany, in the university over there. And there, the frum students who came from frum families tried to make some kind of a little hillel of their own, just to bechazik each other, and he's recording in a novelistic form what's actually really going among them, and they're trying to have these debates about, can you prove God exists, how do you know the Torah is true? Every time they come with all these arguments, and then they say, but then Kant comes and crushes it all. The dominant figure over there. So it's really a very powerful one in that regard. Now, I heard this lecture from a guy named Professor David Ruderman, who's a friend of mine who went to some of his lectures. He's no connection whatsoever, I can assure you, to Rabbi Ruderman. This guy, his father was a Reform rabbi. He was once upon a time a Reform, but he's a very distinguished historian. He gave that up to go for a career in Jewish history. He's the head of history in Penn today. He sits on an academic kingdom. And he was interested in something called the Sefer Ha-Bris, which, interesting, when I came to the Hertzbergs years ago, that's the first thing Menashe Shamros gave me. He says, here's my copy of the Sefer Ha-Bris. It's not this particular one. It was an older one. And the Sefer Ha-Bris is not exactly something anybody's ever heard of. I understand that. And I can tell you, though, it's one of the most reprinted books, Sfarm, in modern Jewish history. Here's a Sefer, it was reprinted maybe 75, 80 times. Originally published in the late 1790s, and all throughout the 1800s, early 1900s, it's published in Ladino, in Yiddish, in Hungarian, in over and over again in Hebrew, all across the Jewish world. It's quite remarkable, right? All across the Jewish world. We don't have any other books that's republished as much as this is in this kind of way, and therefore, whatever it is, the guy's onto something. Okay, so what is it? This latest edition I'm holding in my hand is published in Mei Sharm 20 years ago. It's a science book. What kind of science book are they publishing in Mei Sharm? Therein lies the tale. Therein lies the tale. you don't need me to tell you if they're public.